Somewhere in north-central New South Wales, a four-wheel drive was found wrapped around a tree, engine cold, doors unlocked. Its owner had vanished a week earlier. Police, state emergency service volunteers, and fire crews combed the bush for days. They found tyre tracks. They found the crash site. They never found him. He has not been seen since 2015, and his family is still waiting. He is not the only one this land has taken. For over 150 years, people have walked into this forest and failed to walk back out, swallowed by 5,000 square kilometres of near-identical grey-green scrub, where no landmark repeats and no direction feels certain. Truckers still report what their grandparents reported, a tall, upright, hair-covered shape at the tree line. Gone in a blink. Scientists had no real explanation. Now they think they do, and it is stranger and more dangerous than anyone expected. This is the Pilliga. If you're new here, welcome. This channel is built around exactly this kind of place where geography, deep history, and unresolved mystery intersect, and we go beyond legend into the research. If that's your kind of story, subscribe now, because the Pilliga is one of the strangest cases we've covered. To understand why the Pilliga holds this reputation, you first have to understand its scale, because numbers alone barely do it justice. The Pilliga Forest, still called the Pilliga Scrub by most locals, covers roughly 5,000 square kilometres of north-central New South Wales, between the towns of Narrabri, Coonabarabran, Barradine and Guabagar. It is the largest remaining continuous stretch of native forest west of the Great Dividing Range, and the largest surviving block of dry, semi-arid woodland left in the state. Driving across it in a straight line can take the better part of a day. The forest itself is deceptively uniform. White cypress pine and ironbark eucalypts dominate the canopy in dense, repeating stands, broken by broombush thickets, and after rain a sudden explosion of wildflowers. It supports an outsized share of biodiversity for country this dry, over 900 plant species, some 300 native animals, and in summer, becomes one of the state's most fire-prone landscapes. Beneath all of it lies Pilliga sandstone, a coarse red-gold rock laid down in a network of ancient freshwater lakes during the Jurassic period, in places more than 300 metres thick. To the south, that sandstone is capped with basalt, poured out by the same volcanic eruptions that built the nearby Warrumbungle and Nandua ranges some 13 to 17 million years ago. Millions of years of wind and rain have since carved that stone into overhangs, hollows and true cave systems, the sandstone caves and salt caves among them chambers, large enough to shelter people, horses and entire families from the sun. There is more beneath the surface than most visitors realise. The Pilliga sits above part of the Great Artesian Basin, one of the largest underground freshwater reservoirs on Earth, and over some of the largest untapped onshore gas reserves in Australia, locked in coal seams deep below the woodland floor. Above ground, more than 2,000 kilometres of old forestry track wind through the trees, most unmarked, many virtually identical. It is, in almost every sense, a landscape built to disorient. Long before any of this was mapped by surveyors, it was known in extraordinary depth by the people who have lived here for tens of thousands of years. The Pilliga lies on the country of the Gomeroi Nation, also known as the Gomeroi or Kamilaroi people, one of the 4 largest Aboriginal nations in Australia, with the Wailwan people's country bordering it to the west. Their connection to this forest is not a matter of history, it is continuous, and it is written into the land itself, grinding grooves worn into sandstone by generations of hands, trees scarred for bark and shields, and stone tools, ochre sources, and rock art sheltered inside the same caves carved by that ancient volcanic rock. The name Pilliga is itself believed to come from the Gomeroi word bilar, some accounts translate it as spear, others connect it to balar, the casuarina, or swamp oak, that lines the region's watercourses. For the Gomeroi and Wailwan people, this forest carries what their own cultural heritage records describe as powerful, ongoing spiritual significance, tied to the dreaming account of the hairy man, understood within their tradition to have lived in this country since time immemorial. This is not a campfire story invented for tourists. It is a living element of the oldest continuous culture on Earth, held and passed down with a seriousness that deserves the same seriousness in return distinct from, and far older than, anything the modern horror genre would later build on top of it. In the broader Gomeroi tradition, it is Byam, the great creator ancestor, who is said to have shaped the rivers, mountains, and forests of this country and handed down its laws. The Pilliga's own deep lore sits within that much older cosmology, not apart from it. That depth of knowledge extended to the practical as much as the spiritual. Gomeroi custodianship includes the recharge waters that feed the Great Artesian Basin far below the forest floor, evidence of an understanding of this landscape's hidden hydrology long before it had a name in any textbook. In a country this dry, traditional gathering places clustered tightly around known water sources, because everywhere else was recognised, correctly, as unforgiving. Long before modern instruments arrived, the oldest continuous knowledge system on Earth had already reached the conclusion science would eventually confirm: the Pilliga was never a place to enter carelessly. The written record of the Pilliga's danger begins almost as soon as colonial settlement does. 19th century graziers who took up runs along its edges routinely warned newcomers never to enter the deep scrub alone, and for good reason. The prolonged droughts of the 1870s and 1880s emptied entire pastoral leases as the land proved harsher than anyone had accounted for. Reports of stockmen and travellers who wandered off known tracks and failed to return were, in this era, common enough across remote New South Wales that they rarely made headlines at all. They simply became part of the country's quiet, accumulated toll names remembered locally, if at all, rather than recorded. By the 20th century, a more specific pattern had taken hold. Truckers on the long remote stretch of the Newell Highway that cut straight through the forest began describing the same figure again and again, decade after decade, tall, broad-shouldered, moving upright on two legs at the edge of their headlights, always gone by the time they'd registered what they'd seen. The reports never really stopped. They continue today, gathered in online communities and local retellings, generation after generation describing the same silhouette in the same stretch of trees, often with no knowledge of how many others had described exactly the same thing before them. In March of 1993, that same highway claimed a life the region still speaks of. A woman known locally only as the Pilliga Princess, a reclusive figure who had lived rough along the forest's edge for years, pushing her belongings in a shopping trolley and occasionally accepting rides from truckers who knew her by sight, was struck and killed crossing the road at night. She was buried in nearby Narrabri. Her story endures less as a mystery than as a quiet tragedy. But it is inseparable from the Pilliga's identity. Even its ghost stories here are rooted in real, unresolved human sorrow, not invention. Then, in 2015, came Terry Lloyd. The Goondawindi man vanished after driving into the forest, and his car was discovered a week later, crashed into a tree roughly 150 kilometres south of Narrabri. Police, SES volunteers and fire crews searched the surrounding bush extensively, on foot and from the air. No trace of him was ever found. His case was later featured in a national campaign using facial recognition technology to search social media for missing Australians, a reminder that, a decade on, his family have never stopped looking, even as the trail through the trees went cold. He remains one name among several the Pilliga has never given back. If you're waiting for this to turn into a story about the supernatural, keep watching, because what researchers who study this landscape have found is stranger and more unsettling than any monster in the trees. And if that's the kind of mystery you want more of, subscribe now. There's more waiting for you. Inevitably, in the age of the internet, the Pilliga's reputation metastasized far beyond its own borders. A 2014 found footage horror film built around the legend introduced it to a global audience. Facebook groups sprang up collecting sighting reports and blurry trail camera stills. Ghost hunting tourists began driving out specifically hoping for an encounter, and online forums started reaching for bigger, stranger explanations. Talk of the Pilliga as an Australian Bermuda Triangle, claims of unexplained magnetic interference, even suggestions of extraterrestrial involvement tied to the forest's remoteness and its enormous underground gas and water reserves. Investigators and skeptics who actually looked into the physical evidence found something far more mundane, in line with how cryptid sightings tend to be explained elsewhere in Australia. During recent conservation work, ecologists clearing feral animals from part of the Pilliga removed close to 1,000 feral goats alone, alongside pigs and foxes, precisely the kind of large, upright, capable, unfamiliar silhouette that a startled witness, moving at dusk through unfamiliar scrub, has long been prone to mistake for something else entirely. Some of the most talked about encounters have been traced back to deliberate pranks, locals dressing up or playing tricks on unsuspecting travellers, fully aware of the legend they were feeding, with the story outliving its origin as a joke. And the online talk of magnetic anomalies runs into a simple geological problem. The Pilliga sandstone is an ordinary quartz-rich sedimentary rock, with none of the iron-bearing mineral content that produces the kind of electromagnetic effects those theories require. None of this, importantly, touches the Gomeroi and Wailwan people's own account of the hairy man, which is a matter of living cultural and spiritual tradition, not a claim submitted for outside verification, and not something this investigation was ever trying to disprove. Popular cryptid-tourism and traditional dreaming knowledge are simply not the same phenomenon, however often the internet conflates the two. What the research did confirm was something else entirely. The danger here was never really in question. Search and rescue data across remote New South Wales consistently identifies exactly the conditions the Pilliga specialises in: visually monotonous terrain, minimal reliable water. An absence of consistent navigation reference points as the strongest predictors of a missing person's case turning fatal. The mystery was never really whether something dangerous lived in the Pilliga. It was what precisely that danger actually was. The answer turns out to be the forest itself. Stand in the deep Pilliga, and every direction looks the same. Identical cypress trunks, identical red dirt, a canopy too even to triangulate against. There is no reliable water outside of rare, unpredictable rain events, no consistent mobile signal across most of its 2,000 plus kilometres of track, and stretches of sand and clay that can bog a vehicle within metres of a formed road. Flash flooding can turn dry creek beds into impassable barriers within the hour, sometimes cutting off the very track someone was relying on to get out. Beneath the surface, that same ancient sandstone conceals real hidden voids, extensive eroded cave systems, and long abandoned timber-getting shafts, largely unmapped, exactly where a disoriented, dehydrated person might seek shelter or fall. There is also a documented psychological dimension to this that few people outside wilderness medicine encounter. Researchers studying survivors of extreme isolation mountaineers, polar explorers, shipwrecked sailors, desert wanderers have repeatedly recorded what is known as the sensed presence phenomenon, a vivid, involuntary conviction that another being is close by, walking alongside you, watching from just out of sight. It appears reliably under a specific combination of conditions: monotony, heat, dehydration, exhaustion, fear, and a landscape offering no visual variation for the mind to anchor to. It is one of the best documented effects in the psychology of extreme environments, and the Pilliga, by its exact physical design, produces nearly every one of those conditions at once. None of that makes the experience any less real to the person having it. A mind constructing a companion under mortal stress is not weak or foolish. It is a mind correctly registering that something has gone very wrong. Which means the Gomeroi and Wailwan people were never being fanciful when they treated this country with total seriousness. They were recording, in the oldest language available to them, precisely what modern science would eventually measure, that this forest can undo a person, mind and body both, and that it has been doing so for far longer than anyone has kept written records. Perhaps that is the real story of the Pilliga, not a monster in the trees, but a landscape old enough to have been telling the truth about itself, in two languages that arrived independently at the same conclusion. Fittingly, this ground now hosts native species clawing back from local extinction, even as the forest keeps its darker reputation for taking things away. What do you think really happened to Terry Lloyd? Let us know in the comments, and if you want more deep dives into places where history, science and mystery collide, subscribe now. We'll see you in the next one.